Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of No Limits. My name is Scott Morgan, off the Motor City Mad Mouth. Glad to have Candy Ebling inside. Candy, how are you?
Hello, Scott. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Looking forward to this broadcast tonight. Last week we had an opportunity to do a broadcast on a tribute to mothers. Well, guess what? We get to do the other bookend, and we get to talk about our fathers. And Candy?
I was going to say it's like a sequel, but it's not any... Normally on like a movie sequel, the first one's normally the best one. I would say in this sequel, they're both equal.
Well, 1A and 1B, so to speak. It's something that Brett Favre used to do. Waffle, right? Can't say which one's better than the other, so we'll just say they're both good. All right. Anyways, that's a Green Bay Packer reference. Don't want to sit here and tell you I have to eat crow with you on this broadcast because the Lions got smoked by the Packers, but what can I tell you? Good win for the Packers. Lions, well, whatever.
Well, aren't you kind of used to it by now?
Yeah, well, that's true. But you don't have to stick it to me too bad, but there'll be a Lions and a Packers theme here on this broadcast. So why not go ahead and talk about the fact that indeed the Packers, won 42-21, right? 3 touchdown favorites. And I predicted it right on last week's edition of the Sports Exchange with Steve Ballesteri. Sometimes it's painful, but it is what it is. But on tonight's broadcast, let's talk about our tribute to fathers. Give me your definition of a father.
A father. Wow, that's a loaded question. A father is for a girl. It's the first love for a male figure. It's someone that you look up to. It's someone that sets an example for you. It's someone that raises you and teaches you. At least I would say we hope they do. We hope they man up. They, like I said, they provide. They are a shoulder to cry on. They teach you. They help teach you how to become the adult that you want to become. They mold you. I don't know. I was, you're me. I was like a daddy's little girl. They introduce you to different things. In my case, like sports. What's the definition for you, Scott?
Someone you look up to for advice, and that's a role model. Period. Role model. So, my father, undoubtedly proud of him. What can I tell you? So, why don't we talk about some of the memories that you've had with yours, and then I'll go over some of mine.
Okay. Anyone in particular, or
whatever comes to mind, Candy. I got a bunch of them, but I'll go over them, and I'm sure other ones will come along with the broadcast. I'll have some other interesting things to add insights. But why don't we lead off with you?
Okay. So, my dad is a math teacher. At least now he's a retired math teacher. But he was a math teacher in the school system that we went to school in. I was fortunate. So, he was in the same school system. He ended up being in the same high school as I was. But my brothers and sisters, let me backtrack. I'm the oldest of the siblings. When I first started high school, there was 2 high schools in my town. And so I went to one high school and my dad taught at the other high school. So for the first year, I was fortunate and he wasn't in the same school. The second year, our high schools merged together, and then I was in the same school as he taught. Luckily, I was already past the classes that he taught, whereas my brothers and sisters actually had him for a teacher. But he taught us, obviously, that education is important. And it's not always so much about what you're learning, but the fact that you can learn that has carried me through. The ability to listen and not just hear something, but listen. Because those are two different words.
Right.
I'll never forget back in high school. I believe it was my sophomore year, and I want to say it was early on in my sophomore year because I want to say it was at a point where I couldn't drive yet, or I didn't have my license yet. And me and a bunch of my friends wanted to go out for lunch. And when I mean out, I don't mean walking to the corner restaurant or we wanted to go someplace else. So my dad agreed to take us. There we were all sitting in McDonald's. And my dad and I to this day, my dad started moving his straw in his glass. And you know when you do that and you have a plastic lid and it's plastic on plastic and so sometimes it makes those funny sounds? We pretended we were having a conversation with the straws in our glass.
Interesting.
Everybody started looking at us and laughing at us. How many kids can say they did that with their dad?
No, I don't think too many people messing with the straws, but it's okay. If it's a memory that comes out, more power to you.
It's one of them. I mean, my dad, like I said, he taught in the high school. He was also the high school football statistician. And he did that for, oh my goodness, many, many, many years. Because I would always remember after the game I'd be able to go down on the field and, go talk to him. And I would look up at the high school players when I was really young. Oh, how cool it is to be able to come on the field that they play on. My dad also ended up becoming a Milwaukee Brewers usher. And in the same respect, I could go to the games and he'd look for an usher that he knew down low. And when I could, he'd move us. So I can honestly say that for the All-Star game that happened in Milwaukee, my dad was ushering that game. Me and my brother were at that game. And about the fourth or fifth inning, now mind you, our seats were nosebleed seats because everybody and their brother wanted to be at the game.
Right.
So we had seats way up in the nosebleed. Not even euchre seats, but my dad moved us down, I would say about the fourth or fifth inning, and we were literally the fourth row behind home plate. You could see us on camera. And we were there, and luckily, or unluckily, depending on how you want to look at it, that game was the game that went into extra innings that actually never ended. It ended in a tie because they ran out of pitchers because they didn't have enough people.
Right.
And my brother and I can say my dad was instrumental in getting us those seats that you could actually see us and we were on camera. Pretty cool stuff.
Any other ones that stand out?
There's so many.
Come up with a few more.
How about, this is one that you and I share, and you talk about it very often. How about the time when he came down here and we decided to go down to the Keys with him?
Oh, yeah.
So we decided to go down to the Keys, and if anybody has ever been to the Keys, you know that there is one way out, one road in, and one road out. And to get down to, depending on which key you want to go to, you have to go through the first key. Well, we happened to pick a weekend, and we didn't know this, where the first key had a seafood boil going on.
Right. And we ended up taking him on that glass bottom boat.
Right. But to get to that glass bottom boat, we had to go past all the traffic that was there for the seafood boil.
Right.
And I want to say it took us, an hour to go,
let me tell you what. Here,
half a mile?
Yeah, it took an hour, and I tell you what, I took my fist, slammed it against the steering wheel so many times. The only thing I'm surprised I didn't have was a broken hand. But your dad's one-liners were off the chart. I don't think I would have made it through that 1 mile in 1 hour without Fred Ebling's sense of humor. I've seen a lot of things in my day, but when it comes to a guy like him firing off one-liners, my goodness, Fred Ebling was indeed at the top of his game there. That was unbelievable.
Of course, another one of my memories, and I'll never ever forget this, is my dad walked me down the aisle. And if you know my dad, he typically now uses a wheelchair. But he got up out of his wheelchair and used his walker that day to walk me down the aisle to say I do to you.
Oh, very touching. Okay. And I know how much you enjoy the interaction between him and I, the way we go out there and go at it back and forth, and that you become the old referee there, and you're always turning your head. But you know, deep down inside, you love it because your dad and your husband get along great. It's just you're the referee in the middle when it gets pretty interesting, to say the least.
To say the least, yes. Why don't you share a couple about your dad?
Absolutely. Many, like you indicated, but coaching my youth sports teams in baseball and basketball. And in one of those years, we ended up winning a championship 21-0. And another year, we made it to the city finals. Came up short as a runner-up. He was a heck of a coach. Believed that we practiced a lot, and he pushed us hard. And I'll tell you, there were times when I would go ahead and struggle at the plate. So he would take me out like an hour or two before we would actually go to the field, and he'd throw additional batting practice. And I remember one time all that paid off, and I ended up getting a hit in one of those games. That was pretty good. How can I ever forget him taking me to the 1968 World Series, Game 3? I was 6 years of age at the time. Earl Wilson was on the hill for the Tigers. They lost the game, but being able to say I went to a World Series with my father, priceless. This is one thing I'm not overly proud to talk about, but nevertheless it happened. The Detroit Lions were playing the Chicago Bears at the old Tiger Stadium, and a fellow by the name of Chuck Hughes passes away of a heart attack at the very end of the game. Dick Butkus is out there yelling to the officials that Hughes is down, and to say the least, he passed, the only player that ever passed away on the field. And to say that I was a part of that game, it was hard. Had nightmares at night, and asked him if I could stay with him at night. Said absolutely. It's hard, traumatic for anybody, let alone a 6-year-old to witness death that way. But it's a game that we both went to, and my dad and I used to go to a lot of Red Wing games, some Piston games, Tigers, Lions, you name it, before I started to find my own way in the building. So we would go to a lot of Red Wings games. One of the biggest moments that really stands out to me, and this is really, really important to me, is he gave the thumbs up, allowing me to do my Grandma Sophie's eulogy. And thanks to my Uncle Albert Kroll and Aunt Judy Stroll for also giving the thumbs up. That meant a lot to me because his mother, my Grandma Sophie, and I were so close. They were as inseparable as you can, and my father signed off on it. He knew how close we were, and when he signed off on it, and I was the only one that delivered that eulogy, by the way. So for me to have that microphone all to myself to pay tribute to my Grandma Sophie, to me, is the greatest thing that I feel I've ever done in my personal life outside of getting married. But my Grandma Sophie, to me, and I were as close as you can get outside of Muhammad Ali, sports-wise, and Gordie Howe. Grandma Sophie, to me, is the greatest person in my life. And thanks to my father giving the heads up on it, Judy and Uncle Al, that meant so much to me that I'll never stop talking about. I still think I have the eulogy somewhere at home, too. But thank you, Dad, for allowing me to do that. It was his mother. And I hope, and I know that from what people have told me, that he was quite happy with the way I went and did it. Of course, it helped that I ended up writing the eulogy on an airplane flight from Arizona to Michigan, and then being able to edit it while she was in her casket. Nevertheless, it turned out quite well. Now, on an easier or upbeat note, he owned a sporting goods store in Oak Park, Michigan. He had a manager by the name of Sam Greenblatt, who sent me over to visit a sports talk show over at WXYZ Radio. And as a result, I went there one time. Who would have ever have thought at that time, when I connected with George Eichhorn and Ron Cameron, whose show it was at the time, that would be my break into the media.
Nice.
So, all part of All Pro Sporting Goods. I wouldn't be setting microphone unless Mike Morgenroth inadvertently got me on the air, and it would lead to the monster that would become the Motor City Madmouth.
Who would have ever thought?
Yeah, who would have? And then, on a more interesting note, he taught me how to drive. Okay, my goodness.
Now I know who to blame.
Yeah, now you know who to blame. But he did, stuck with me. I ended up, don't mind admitting this, I didn't pass driver's ed the first time and barely squeaked by the seconds if you don't pass it.
That I understand.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, I had an instructor that had happy feet where you had a brake on the right side. My father said, "Don't worry, we'll get it done privately. But it wouldn't be bad if you could pass it the second time. That way you don't have to feel like you wasted your summer." Indeed, I did. But again, going to sports events with your own father really is pretty cool stuff. So.
Well, can I interject here? Because I can honestly tell you that my dad is the one responsible for taking me to my first Packer game, which happened to be a playoff game in Lambeau Field, of all places. The hallowed grounds of Lambeau Field.
I'll bet you he was twice as proud when I took you to the game when the Lions took on the Packers for the NFC North, and he had an opportunity to see you on the field as well.
It was a little different version of the game, yes.
Yeah, but the bottom line is you had a chance to take pictures at Lambeau Field. Your mom and dad were alive to see it, and I'm thankful that I had a hand in getting you in that football game when I worked really hard through the Detroit Lions PR staff to pull it off. Nevertheless, he had an opportunity. One of the more funny moments, though, I have to tell you, was the day that I got my driver's license. I ran a red light on my way home because I was excited. Well, he would often joke around with me, but with all due respect, as him and I would joke around about it, I think that I've had a lot of practice having driven over 3.5 million miles and the better part of 42 years behind the wheel. And we joke around about that quite a bit. So, interesting stuff. Yeah,
I get that. My dad, he taught me how to drive. Never forget, back in the day when we had the old station wagons, those fun mobiles, where the back seat turned backwards, and so you were driving with your back to the front. Yeah, Dad was a hoot and a holler. He would let me drive to school, and of course, my dad is not always the most punctual.
Really?
Of course. So I'll never forget the day that we were driving, and I was a little late to first hour. The principal at the high school knew better than to give Dad a first hour class, because if he gave him a first hour class, he'd always be late. So if he gave him like prep period or whatever, first hour, then then it wasn't that big of a deal. But there was one day where we were a little late, and my first hour, unfortunately, I had study hall. Who wants study hall in the first hour of the day? You want it to later in the day so you can get all your homework done so you don't take any home. But needless to say, I had study hall, and needless to say, I had my study hall professor was a stickler about being in your seat when the bell rang. And of course, this day I'm late. My dad was, running late. So I get to my seat. It's after hours, or after the bell had rung. So the teacher told me, "Candy, detention after school." So later on in the day, I get a call down to the office. And I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on now? And of course they say it over the loudspeaker, so everybody, all the kids, heard all these names being listed, and it was all kids that had to go down to the office for whatever reason. So I go down to the office, and I'm in the principal's office, and we're talking, and he's like, "Let me guess. You drove today with your dad, and you were late because your dad was late, and that's why you have this detention." I said, "Yeah, that's kind of right." He's like, "Okay, I'll just talk to your dad. Forget detention." I'm like, woohoo! Good thing I know the principal, and he knows my dad.
Well, I got to tell you, my father had a heck of a work ethic. He ran a successful sporting goods store All Pro Sporting Goods, and also went ahead and did some. He owned a business called Purchasing Service, which was a car broker dealership. So, you talk about a work ethic. This guy definitely had it for sure. And of course, he would end up running a very successful home improvement company as well in Metro Detroit for quite a while. So
I hear you. Work ethic.
yeah.
My dad was a school teacher. He worked part-time at a liquor store. So any kids that wanted to go buy liquor that weren't of age knew not to go to that liquor store because they knew they might see my dad.
Yeah, right.
So that's why the liquor store loved having him, because that he knew all those underage kids.
Right.
And he was an usher for the Milwaukee Brewers. So in the summers when he wasn't working as a teacher, he was an usher. He worked 3 jobs just so my mom didn't have to, so he could raise 4 kids.
Right.
And what a job he did.
All right, so let's go on to some of the lessons that they taught. And then I want to do a little special segment on father figures and grandfathers. I think they're influential, but we're going to save that till the very end.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest gifts he ever bought me, I don't count vehicles that he's helped me finance or get, was that thing called a college ring. When I graduated from the University of South Florida in 1986, I became the first person ever in our family to get a degree. Safe to say I'm still the only one in our family to have a degree. And he asked me, what gift do you want? I said, well, I'd like to get my college ring. Bingo. How fast can I get to the money? And to this day, I wear that ring proud. I call it my championship ring. And, he respected how hard I worked. I ended up working a couple of jobs throughout my time, whether it's one good one or 2 other ones. And he respected the effort, the determination that it took for me to get that championship ring of mine. So that was really an important gift. The material things are what they are in life, Candy, but that ring that you have that signifies education meant quite a bit to me. Go ahead.
On the note of education, I think one of the greatest things that my parents did for me as far as college education, because yes, I do have one, is they said, okay, you pick where you want to go, and we're going to give you X amount of dollars towards your education. The rest of it is on you.
Right.
And some people, I was in a dorm. I lived on campus for years because I was able to afford to not work during the school year with what my parents gave me and then what I would earn during the summer breaks. But I can tell you that I think I value my education so much more because I had to work for it.
Right.
You would see lots of kids that their parents paid for it, and therefore they didn't put into it enough. And some of them didn't make it. Some of them dropped out. Some of them decided, you know what, I'm going to go easy. I'm going to go for an easy major just to get a degree. But I think I value it so much more because they did make me work for it. They taught me hard work does pay off. And that built character and gave me such a rich college experience because of it.
Well, we never had the finances for them to help me out to a point where they were going to put me through. I didn't want them anyways. My grandma Sophie kept telling me, why don't you try to get grants, scholarships, and student loans? I don't have to pay for them later. I'll just work through it. That way nobody can take it away from me. But my father helped out where he could, obviously. But, again, I didn't want to tax the family. And I felt like you said, you have to have blue-collar work ethics to try to get the job done. Yes, you indeed appreciate it a lot more. Let's go to lessons that were taught. Okay. I used to pick his brain about sales techniques during his home improvement days. And I remember one of the biggest tricks he taught me was the pen trick. You have a pen in your hand, you stick it on the table. By the time you go out there writing it up in order, the customer would think it's not a foreign object, and they got used to seeing it. Boy, I'll tell you, psychology, he definitely knew it pretty well. But I used to pick him about all kinds of sales techniques. The pen technique was interesting. I think there are lots of times, though, where he may have questioned some of my presentations, but when he understood that I told them the only thing I didn't do was put a gun to their heads. Oh, okay, I don't want to argue with you at a meeting. That I know you gave it your best shot. Just that little sense of humility. But I use that as a way to motivate me and make me more determined and become better at what I did. But the guy was a mastermind when it came to the sales occupation and being an entrepreneur, or to expect. I remember a lot of times when we had debates in sports about Detroit teams, and again, we still will always have those. But, again, here's a guy that got me into sports, so why wouldn't we have a debate? The only difference later on in life is, instead of me being a kid and him being a father, I have that thing called a press pass, and I have a little bit of clout, and I talk to the people. Nevertheless, that passion enabled me to be sitting in this chair and in a whole lot of press boxes. And again, as I just alluded to before, I used to enjoy proving them wrong at times, starting in sales. But again, like I said, we all like to try to let people know that if they're not sure that you can do it. And let me tell you, when I finally kept producing, I tell you, he was my biggest fan at that point. But the real main thing here is you think about his logic. Why would a journalist, get into sales? Why? You talk about two professions so contrast. And I think one of the things I really enjoyed doing, that every time I wrote up an order for his home improvement company, he would go out there and read my contracts and say, what am I reading, one of your articles? I said, yeah, Dad, you probably are. But when you can collect all the money, you know what? You'll be glad I read them, because you won't have to worry about collecting it and people saying I promised them this and that. And you know what? You know how quickly he got sold on that philosophy? That fast. And again, his ability to negotiate automobiles, whether it's through his car brokership or me watching him in action at dealerships, has enabled me to know all the tricks of the trade. So he was really good. Then again, being from Motor City, what the heck would you expect anyways?
True.
I think one of the prouder moments that I really have, and I think you can appreciate this, is at our wedding in Milwaukee at Miller Park. We were indoors, not outside. You know how skeptical they were about that wedding on January 1st, 2017? Quite. But the man lucked out. We got 40-degree weather. And I think he had to understand the fact that not all ballparks were what they are. That this is an indoor facility with a restaurant. And he's accustomed to the older stadiums. But let me tell you, when he got there, he didn't have a problem there at all. He definitely got used to it pretty quick. What about you?
So some of the memories, I'm gonna go way back. So let's go back when I was a kid growing up, before I even had siblings. You know how you remember, I don't know if you do remember or not, but my dad would be the one that would come in and tuck me in at night, make sure I was in bed, said my prayers, and we'd say them together, and then we'd always sing a song. So we'd sing like This Land Is Your Land, or whatever song it might be, Twinkle Twinkle. I remember when I was a little bit older and he was teaching, and like I said, he was a math teacher, and this was back before computers did so much that they do. I would help him grade papers. He'd give out tests, and I'd have to get my homework done, and once I got my homework done, I would grade papers. At one point, I thought I might be a teacher because of him. He inspired me that much. But then he also discouraged me from being a teacher. He said, you know, Candy, it's not the same world that it was when I got into the field. I can see the respect that kids give teachers is changing. They feel entitled.
Right.
You know, I'll never forget, we threw him a retirement party, and how many people showed up. It was a cold, we had it out in a park. We thought, oh, it's Memorial Day weekend, it'll be great, it'll be outside at a local park, we'll have lots of people. It was cold, wet, miserable weather, but still wonderful to see the people that came and showed up and supported him.
You know, it's funny. You mentioned that, and my dad held a position when we were back in Little League Baseball. He would be a commissioner of a given league because that was something that was expected of you. He held the title, and who do you think had to stay home to get all the results? Me.
Yep.
All the stats, all the results. By the way, you can stay home and just take all the games I'm out there doing. I got it. No problem. Whatever you want me to do, Dad. No problem. I mean, here you go. Put them in there. This is what you got. Report them to the. Do whatever you want. But I had no problem with it. Get to do the dirty work while he's out there. Hey, it is what it is. I'm playing ball thanks to you. So what's the difference to begin with?
Mm-hmm. Dads, we appreciate it. We appreciate them. We love them. We wouldn't be here without them.
Yep, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. Let me go ahead and talk about my grandfathers, okay? Sidney Morgenroth, dead, age 55, lung cancer. Too bad. I really enjoyed the short time we had with him, all of 10 years. But what happened was, when my grandfather died at the age of 55, my dad quit smoking cold turkey. And I'll tell you, you think quitting smoking is hard, okay? He did it cold turkey. And because of my grandfather, Sidney Morgenroth's death, I never started smoking in the first place.
Good for you.
I vowed to never, ever smoke because of my grandfather's death. And you know what? When my father took the lead and decided to quit cold turkey, that definitely sealed it that I would never do it. So my grandfather, Sidney Morgenroth's legacy lives with every day that I go without smoking, and more so in my father, who had enough guts to do it cold turkey. More power to you, Dad. Another grandfather I had, Sidney Kaplan. He's an interesting bird, this guy. Here's a guy that had 3 daughters. My mother, my Aunt Betty, and Tina. And when I came on board as his first grandson, holy moly, yes, indeed, there are males that come out. And my grandpa, Sidney Kaplan, I had a lot of good time. You know, he was at my bar mitzvah when I was 13 years of age. We'd hang out on Sundays. At that time, we would do all kinds of crazy stuff. Go to an athletic club called Sidney Hill. We'd talk about Evel Knievel, the heavy daredevil. But my grandpa, Sidney Kaplan, loved having a grandson. Oh, was he enjoying every bit of that. Of course, I was the first one there. And then another guy I definitely want to talk about was my step-grandfather, Sidney Jacobs. When my grandpa, Sidney Morgenroth, died, you talk about a stepfather who became a grandfather pretty darn quick. Sidney Jacobs had one of the kindest hearts in the world. He certainly was a great companion to my grandma, Sophie. And he helped me get my first credit card. And we spent a lot of time together. And, you know, nobody will replace Sidney Morgenroth, but Sidney Jacobs certainly filled in very nicely. Unfortunately, he had a sad ending by committing suicide due to depression. And I think that's when I became familiar with that. Of course, I became familiar far sooner, but when it hits you closer to home and a loved one does it, then you become a lot more aware about the disease that it is what it is. So Sidney Morgenroth, Sidney Kaplan, Sidney Jacobs, if you're listening to this, I love every one of you. You're heavily missed. Wish would have had more time with you. But nevertheless, I hope you're hearing this broadcast in heaven. Now, on to the father figures. I have to bring up...
Can I go with my grandfather
Absolutely.
first?
Go ahead.
Okay. So let's take my mom's dad first. Grandpa Smith. So for most of my life, I remember my grandparents. So when I was born, they lived in Milwaukee, but my grandfather, shortly thereafter I was born, retired, and they went to live on my grandmother's farm, which happened to be in the family for 100 years. It was just a 110-acre crop farm. It was in Wisconsin. We would go visit them frequently. Every summer I would spend at least a week, 2 weeks up there. And I always remember that my grandfather, he had a wheelbarrow. And when we would go out to one of the crops or one of the fields or their garden, their huge garden, he'd take the wheelbarrow. Well, when I came along and I started to hang around with him more and more, he created a seat for the wheelbarrow so I could sit on the wheelbarrow, and he would wheel me down to the field and he'd wheel me back up. And I loved spending time there with them. And I often remember, because they lived out on a farm, and people people would take their cats that they didn't want anymore and they would just dump them. My grandparents had a love for them and couldn't see them going by the wayside. So my grandparents bought cat food up until the day my grandmother passed away when she was 96 years old, God bless her soul. And they would feed stray cats. So they had 2 cats inside the house if they kept inside the house the whole time. And then they had cats outside. And they would feed anywhere from 5, 10. One time we counted as many as 30 cats they were feeding outside. And my grandpa, he would walk from the house out to the barn because they left the food out in the barn for the cats. And he would be walking out there, and I'll never forget him yelling, "Here, kitty, kitty, here, kitty, kitty," and they would literally come congregate behind him, and they would follow like a line. So it was a follow the leader line of him with all the cats walking to the barn. Never forget that. My other grandfather, my dad's dad, they lived in Milwaukee. We would go visit them often. One of the favorite places we would go to eat would be Mamma Mia's, and we'd go for Mamma Mia's pizza. And there was more than one location, because I know you and I, Scott, have been to at least one of the locations, not the location that was close that we used to go, that started it all. But we could walk from their house to the pizza place and then walk back home. And I'll never forget, he was an engineer. He was smart. He would fix things. He was a thinker. And you'd ask him a question, and he wouldn't respond immediately because he would think his answer through first and then respond to you. He was a wonderful man as well. Okay, so let's go from grandfathers to father figures.
I got a grocery list. I'm going to talk about 7. I won't get into some heavy details, although maybe I will a little bit because these are all lessons to be learned and to be had. Gene Ryson actually was one of the first employers I ever worked with over at the Highland House in Highland, Michigan. Always a guy that I can turn to for advice. And there was an interesting time when I was looking for a job in baseball that I was able to work back in the kitchen and help him get some of his kitchen staff turned around, and gave me the full latitude to get it done. No matter how difficult the task was, Gene supported what I was going to do. And, but even beyond that situation, he's been a good friend and a person I would turn to for advice. And every time I went back to Michigan, or I was in Michigan, we'd have heart-to-heart talks that would last into the night. And thanks to his late wife, Diane, she didn't mind it because Gene had a heart of gold. And thankfully, he's still alive. So I had a chance to see him about a year ago. Hope to see him at some point again. But Gene, to me, is just a dynamo. He really, really is. So, whether it's the how to he had me as a consultant in his restaurant business or just a plain old person as a father figure. Talk about Gene's right there. Another guy who's actually, I'm thankful that is alive too, has been a longtime family friend named Jerry Weinberg. I've known this guy since the day I was born. And I worked with Jerry, in home improvement business, but I've known him since I've been alive. And he's another guy that I can turn to for advice whenever I need it. And he, obviously the love that Jerry Weinberg and I have, to me, is off the charts. You had an opportunity to meet Harold Kowal, and known as Huey. Too many memories to count with Harold, but the one thing that he always taught me that has stood tall with me is that thing in life called a chess game, because that's exactly what life is. He taught me to go out there and outthink everybody and not lose your composure. And a lot of people, it's very easy to lose your composure and outthink, but when he taught me to outthink, we all have, don't get me wrong, we all have our moments, okay? That's a given. But what Harold/Huey Kowal did to me was being able to go out there and convey that message to me. I feel I'm a much better person for it. And every time I needed somebody to talk to, he was always there for me. When he passed away, that was a very tough pill for me to swallow.
Yep, that one hurt. I remember.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I could call him anytime, and whether it's advice, whatever. Harold, to me, was just truly one of a kind. He really was. But the chess game, folks, it works, and it works real well. A person that I actually came in contact with when I moved to Florida back in 2001 was a fellow by the name of George Allen. George Allen, you know him all too well. But him and I went through a lot of struggles in the South Florida job market. I met him at an alarm company, and we would end up going from one alarm company to another. And when we were looking for different jobs, he coined the phrase, "I can't get a job I don't even want." My goodness, if that isn't classic, I don't
like
even
that
know
one. What is that one again?
I can't get a job that I don't even want. George Allen, that's
That
your
one's for
signature line, man. That was unbelievable. I can remember many times we'd sit over at the Boynton Beach Mall. We'd pick up the Sunday paper, highlight the good, the bad, and the ugly. And everybody knows in South Florida that you had a lot of scams and cons, and we try to pick the best of the worst, and even the worst was the best. And the job thing was ongoing, but again, there was a father-son relationship attached, and obviously that's something that I always knew. We would always spend time on my birthdays together, and the countless amount of times that you and I spent with him and his wife, lovely wife June, were unbelievably and tremendously matched. So, George Allen, rest in peace. I love you. You supported every career move I had, but more importantly, he was the guy that gave me great advice, and we had an awful lot of fun together, too. Another person I should mention is Fred Cullen. Obviously, that's Cindy Cullen, Spike's father. Back in the 1980s, when I made the move to Florida, he was out like my Florida dad. And I'll never forget when he was in construction and he saw an opportunity for me to go to the baseball winter meetings. He said, you need to do this and I'll figure out the finances later. That's when I met Tom Lasorda. I met a lot of great people at the baseball winter meetings. But Fred, to me, was one of those calming influences in my life. He really was. And, what can I tell you? When I needed a father figure, especially in the state of Florida, Fred Cullen was there. And, again, to me, here's a guy who was one of the nicest people on the planet. His wife, Pearl, certainly was a mother figure. We addressed her last week. And Fred Cullen, I want to make sure I reach out to you to let you know you haven't forgotten. Another guy here in South Florida, the late Peter Blueston, who I work with at the Hallandale Digest, gave me a job, believed in me, and at some point wanted me to come back to work, but I was content staying in Michigan. So Peter was like a mentor figure. And last but not least, that guy by the name of Fred Ebling. Oh, how can I go ahead and forget this guy? Him and I, the battling of the wits ends, the sense of humor being what it is. But we'll give him the old coin phrase that when I was studying for the 215 license, okay, you know what? Stay in that room and just put duct tape on your mouth. My goodness.
No, let's set the stage.
Okay.
Because you were studying and you were going to the library. And he knew you were a talker. And let's face it, that's what you do now. I mean, you talk.
Right.
And he knew you were a talker, and he knew you needed to study. So he said the best way for you to study was to go find a room at the library, put duct tape on your mouth so you couldn't talk to anybody else, put your head to the metal and study. And look, you passed.
Yeah.
So his advice must have done some good.
His advice has always done a lot of good. I just enjoy the fact that the guy has taught me a lot about sense of humor. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these other fellows were all right, but nobody had any sense of humor than Fred Ebling. My goodness, this guy.
Well, how about the time, I know you laughed at this one, and this isn't my dad, this is your dad.
Okay.
The four of us, you, me, your mom, and your dad, were all out to dinner, and we're all talking. Typically, you were talking with your dad, and I was talking with your mom, and your dad goes to me, Candy. Yes, Dad. You don't always have to talk to Shyla. You can join in on our conversation because I know you know what we're talking about. Because you guys were talking about sports. He's like, you don't always have to talk to just her. You can talk to us too.
Yeah, and then he would go ahead and say, Shyla, you and I don't have anything in common anyways, and that was just too funny.
And yet they've lasted over 60 years plus and still going.
Yeah, remarkable. And your dad, I got to tell you, when we talk about these broadcasts, he does listen to them a lot, and I enjoy the feedback that I get from him about certain things that we can do to improve the broadcast. So anything I get from Fred Ebling, whether it's a teaching moment to a serious sense of humor, and to me is just unreal. And I think that at a time where we can all have father figures, I certainly am very happy to leave him at the end of this list of 7, because he's certainly an individual that rightfully belongs there. And again, my grandfathers were great, but these are other people that have all been an important influence as well.
I'd say as far as father figures go, I think we have 2 of the best.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mike Morgenroth and Fred Ebling. Candy and I.
We can't thank them enough for all that they do for us.
Right.
You know, they might support us some monetarily, they might not, they support us with their love, with their support. I can never thank either one of them enough.
Yeah, I can't either. And you know what? My father sees that I'm pursuing. I've gotten back in the broadcasting media field full time, but he's always enjoyed the fact that I've been able to do it for the better part of 40 years. And how did I get in it? Thanks to that. Thanks to not only watching him play softball and own a sporting goods store, but a lot of the things that we've done over the years to keep a lot of what we do fresh. So, you know, again, father and son have a very unique relationship. Fathers and daughters have a different one. But
our first loves.
Yeah.
Besides our mom. I mean, let's face it. You know, you're probably your mom, but especially for a girl, the first guy that they love is their dad.
Right. I guess if there's one thing I can really hope for, and I know this is a somber moment, but I'm going to bring it up anyhow. The young Peter Shepik has an opportunity to enjoy Wayne Shepik and Fred Ebling and hope that they can stick around for a while. I know this poor young child doesn't have his grandmothers, but he still has grandfathers out there, and I can only hope that this little guy, PJ, will have an opportunity to enjoy his grandfathers as much as I really enjoyed mine, and I know as much as you've enjoyed yours as well. So, you know, hey, Dad, you know, hopefully you'll listen to this broadcast. And I should point out one thing that was pretty cool, too, is when I had an opportunity to visit Mickey Lolich and eventually put him on a show, I did get my father a book signed by Mickey Lolich, who to me is one of my biggest idols, and I was glad that I was able to give that to my dad as a gift. And, you know, we were able to get your dad a couple of mementos as well through our sports pass as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what do Mickey Lolich and Mickey/Mike Morgenroth have in common? This will be their 80th year on the planet once Mike Morgenroth gets there December 5th of 40, and Mickey Lolich is turning 80 as well. So.
Nice.
Any closing thoughts on this? Tribute to fathers.
I do. I have one. Let me recall it.
And then we'll go ahead and we'll end the broadcast on how people can get a hold of us.
So, Dad. He never looks for praises. He's never one to boast. He just goes on quietly working for those he loves the most. His dreams are seldom spoken. His wants are very few. And most of the time his worries will go unspoken too. He's there, a firm foundation, through all the storms of life, a sturdy hand to hold in times of stress and strife. A true friend we can turn to when times are good or bad. One of our greatest blessings, that man we call our dad.
Well, let me give you a little bit of something that I'll take from Barry Manilow. He had a great song called This One's For You. Okay, I really enjoyed that song. Of course, and Bette Midler had that song, Wind Beneath My Wings. And I think I can, when I put these two songs into perspective, okay, Bette Midler said, did you ever know that you're my hero? Well, Dad, guess what? You are. And Dad, you know what? We talk about Barry Manilow, This One's For You. So with that said, you know, you have the poems, I have the songs. We'll put a spin on it. You're listening to No Limits. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth, acting like the Motor City Mildmouth, but no, I will not trademark that. Okay, I kind of like the Madmouth part better, but we can tone it down every now and then. With that said, for all you folks that want to follow us here and listen to this broadcast again, you can do it through Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Let me repeat that again for you. That's Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. In terms of social media, you can follow us at Twitter at Tribune South. That's at Tribune South. Facebook and Instagram, you can follow us at South Florida Tribune. And the YouTube channel, which we use for a lot of our visual, you can follow us at South Florida Tribune. My dad took me to a lot of hockey games, so you have a hat trick here between Facebook, Instagram, and South Florida Tribune. South Florida Tribune, there's your hat trick. Had to throw a hockey analogy in there. Website, www.southfloridatribune.com. You'll find a lot of our content there, both through our media distribution partners, our writers, as well as all the broadcasts. You can email Candy and I at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And if that's not good enough, you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Scott Morganroth. I'll be more than happy to connect with you as well. So that puts a wrap on this edition of No Limits. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. Candy, you have any final thoughts about what people should be doing during this COVID environment?
Mask up. And you know what? Let's spread love, not hate, and not germs. Spread love. Love you, dads.
Love you, dads. God bless. A lot more memories to be had. Enjoy the ones we already had. So, with that said, good night, everybody. Until we meet again on the next edition of No Limits. Well done. That was good. I enjoyed that.